dare you treat me as if I were invisible? You don't deserve a place at this table.
Enough. The will says otherwise.
Then let everyone here decide. Will truth stand tall, or will greed rule this family?
The room had never felt so fragile, as if one wrong breath could shatter it. What began as a family dinner had turned into a tribunal, where every hidden wound demanded to be heard. And in that charged silence, a single choice was about to reshape not just the evening, but the meaning of kinship itself. This was only the beginning. What came next was even heavier. If you believe in justice, type it in the comments and subscribe. The backyard smelled of charcoal and sweet corn, of sunscreen and cut grass. A little oasis hemmed in by a cedar fence and the narrow alleys of Lakewood. Paper lanterns bobbed under a mild breeze from the lake. Citronella candles burned in glass jars on the picnic tables, their smoke curling like pale threads. Someone had tuned a portable speaker to a summer playlist, and from inside the house came the steady murmur of a television tuned to the ballgame. Guests lifted hamburger buns, passed bowls of coleslaw, and called for mustard with voices bright from late sunlight and beer that sweated in silver buckets. Evelyn Parker stepped through the side gate holding a warm peach cobbler in a glass dish wrapped with a kitchen towel. The towel was thin with years of washing, but the dish held its heat, and the sugared crust crackled like a small promise. She paused a bit to let her eyes adjust, then moved forward, careful not to snag her cardigan on the latch. At the first picnic table, a cluster of cousins she barely knew leaned close over their phones, heads bowed in the glow as if they were praying. Beyond them, the grill flared and hissed, painting Daniel's face in orange and steel. He wore a new apron that announced grill captain, and he held the tongs like a conductor about to give the downbeat. No one turned. That, she told herself, was fine. You arrived quietly to a quiet place. She moved past a string of bunting clipped to the fence, past a cooler where melted ice bobbed like small islands. At the far end of the table, a corner remained clear of paper plates and napkins. She set the cobbler there. The dish clicked softly against the wood. A child ran by, then another, the thud of sneakers quick on the deck. Their laughter came in bright bursts that didn't quite land near her. Near the grill, Melissa tipped her hat toward a woman Evelyn did not recognize. The kind of friend who exists in holiday photos and disappears in January. Their arms brushed, their earrings flashed. The friend said something in a soft, surprised voice. Melissa's answer drifted toward the fence, right in the air like a seed you cannot catch. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Evelyn heard every syllable. The laugh that followed was small and precise, the kind that cuts without leaving blood. She took a breath measured enough to steady a surgeon. She kept her shoulders level and crossed to the buffet, where potato salad sweated in a plastic bowl and a pan of baked beans steamed beneath a loose square of foil. A younger man with a jawline like Daniel's snatched a hot dog and stepped away, eyes skating past her as if her face were a blank wall. Evelyn reached for a serving spoon, then drew back her hand, unsure who would want her to touch the food. Instead, she folded the towel and slid it beneath the cobbler dish to protect the table. A small caretaking in a place where caretaking had grown unfashionable. The house door swung open, and a burst of cool air slipped out. Daniel stepped into it, raising a bottle as if announcing a victory. "To family," he said, and his voice carried over the music and the clink of ice. Bottles and plastic cups lifted obediently all around. He looked out over the yard with a satisfied squint, like a man admiring a field he had just mown. His gaze did not catch on her. She felt it pass above her head as if she were a chair or a lamp. Melissa approached with a plate balanced on one palm, the other hand curled around a phone that never seemed to leave her. "Oh," she said, as if startled by a shape in a room that should have been empty. "Evelyn, you came." Her smile flickered on and off, a motion-activated porch light. "Did you want a plate?" "I'm fine," Evelyn said. "Okay," Melissa replied, and pivoted before the last vowel cooled. She slid back toward the huddle at the grill, where the conversation picked up at the exact tempo it had left off. The portable speaker changed tracks. Beyond the fence, a dog barked twice and fell silent. Rachel passed with 2 friends in tow and a paper cup tilted in her hand. Her ponytail was slick from heat and effort. When she saw her grandmother, her eyebrows rose a fraction, then fell. "Hi," Evelyn said, but the greeting landed in the dust at her feet. The girls moved on, leaving a ripple of citrus body spray and shampoo. One of them looked back, not at Evelyn, but at the cobbler, as if trying to identify the smell. At the end of the table, a folding chair waited where the sun could reach it. Evelyn sat with a straightness learned from a lifetime of church pews and hardback dining room seats, the sort of posture that does not ask for comfort because comfort was never promised. From here, she could see Daniel's shoulders shift as he turned burgers. The gleam of the metal lid he lifted and lowered, the small choreographies of hospitality. He had always loved the choreography. Even as a boy, the setting of napkins, the distribution of forks, the calling out of names. He loved less the listening that hospitality requires. A woman in a yellow sundress whose name Evelyn could not safely guess drifted by with a plate mountainous with corn and salad and something wrapped in bacon. "Do you know where the extra forks are?" She asked no one in particular. The question collapsed into the noise of the yard. Evelyn rose halfway and pointed toward the plastic bin near the cooler, but the woman had already found them, triumph shining in her eyes at the discovery. Inside the house, the crowd thickened. Through the sliding door, Evelyn glimpsed a coffee table holding bowls of chips and a tray of store-bought cookies arranged in a grid that mimicked order. The television voice announced a count and an inning, words that used to mean summer at her own kitchen table. Frank's forearm brushing hers as he reached for salt. On the patio, a cousin laughed too loud, and someone apologized for bumping a shoulder. The apology skimmed the surface like a skipped stone and then sank without a mark. Around the time the shadows lengthened and the children's legs turned dusty from the grass, Daniel raised his bottle again. "To family," he repeated, because some lines feel truer if you say them twice. Glass tapped plastic. A can hissed open. The sound was almost tender. No one asked about the cobbler. No one asked how she had been, or whether her knees still stiffened in damp weather, or if the neighbor's hummingbird had returned to drink from the fuchsias. A child cut close to her chair and jostled the table. The dish slid an inch and stopped. "Sorry," the child said without looking. Evelyn anchored the dish with both palms and felt the heat that remained. A small blessing. Heat does not lie. She waited for the small, ordinary gestures that make a gathering. A chair pulled closer, a napkin offered, a plate thrust into her hands with the right insistence. She waited while flies tested the syrupy lip of a soda bottle, while the paper lanterns shivered. She waited through a song that told a story she had not lived and could not recall. Past waiting came a quiet that surprised her. A quiet like the space in the church, just after the last note of an anthem fades and before the congregation remembers to breathe. Melissa appeared again, the phone cupped like a small mirror. "We didn't know you were coming," she said, as if stating a weather fact. "I brought cobbler," Evelyn said. "That's sweet," Melissa replied, and the word landed askew. "We have plenty of dessert." "I noticed," Evelyn said. "Not sharp, simply accurate." Melissa's smile twitched, then settled itself into place. "Do you want me to put it inside?" "It can rest here," Evelyn said. "Okay," Melissa murmured, and left a slipstream of scented hair and careful perfume following her away. Daniel finally crossed the patio toward her, tongue still in hand, apron smudged with sauces he would later say he invented. "Hey, Mom," he said, cheerful as a yard sign. "You made it." "I did," she replied. "You want a burger? I can do medium. Or hey, I've got veggie patties for Melissa's friend." "I'm fine," she said. "Come on, have a plate." "I said I'm fine," she repeated, a little softer, because softness is a habit she has never fully dismissed. Okay, he said in a voice that means peace and also means distance. He lifted the tongs in a small salute and turned away, called by someone to solve a catch-up problem that required his immediate authority. Behind the fence, the neighbor's wind chimes answered a stingy gust with a few notes that sounded like a memory of rain. Evelyn steadied the dish once more, then rose. She folded napkins into careful squares. She stacked plates left abandoned by children who had run out of appetite but not energy. She found a damp paper towel and wiped away the stickiness that gathering spread like a rumor. No one asked her to do this. It was simply the motion her hands understood when a room filled with untold things. When the sun slipped behind the chimney and the sky took on the color of a bruised peach, people began carrying their joy indoors. Voices condensed into a warmer, denser sound. The backyard emptied, lanterns left to nod to one another. Evelyn lifted the now cool dish and pressed a towel against it for grip. She stepped carefully around the toy truck parked at the foot of the steps. At the sliding door, she paused, but no one came to hold it open. She left the door as she had found it and returned through the gate that had introduced her. The front walk smelled faintly of tomatoes and water basil. At the curb, an elderly neighbor she knew only from a wave band to collect the fallen flyer. "Evening," he said, not startled by her sudden appearance, the way people who live in old neighborhoods learn not to be. "Evening," she answered. On the drive home, the sky settled into a steady gray blue. The streets of Lakewood gave way to the familiar turns that led toward Tremont, where porches wore their seasons like clothes and the small restaurants stacked their chairs on tables at closing. She passed a diner that had once held Frank's favorite stool and imagined him turning with a smile and a joke about how the pie was good, but not as good as the one that lived in her hands. She drove with the windows cracked a finger's width, enough to feel the lake air reminding her that time moves even when you hold yourself still. Her kitchen greeted her with its modest, tidy light. She slid the dish into the sink and ran water until it softened the caramel at the edges. The house settled around her with the gentle creaks of an old companion stretching its bones. In the hallway, she paused to look at the row of photographs that no longer hung there. The walls were pale where frames used to shield them from the sun. She placed her fingertips against one rectangle of untouched paint and felt the difference as if it were a change in temperature. She put the kettle on, though she did not turn the burner. She did not need tea. She needed only the thought of tea. Outside, a car door closed, and laughter drifted from the sidewalk like a memory that belonged to someone else. She took a clean dish towel and folded it neatly, then folded it again, corners aligned, a small geometry that calmed the room. At the window, she looked out at the maple that had shed itself in storms and summers and still reached upward with what remained. She saw, as if from far away, the woman at the end of the picnic table, the dish beneath her hands, the way she had scanned for a chair pulled closer, for a voice that would name her. She saw the air around that woman grow clear and cool, as if a door had opened on the far side of the room and let in a better weather. A text arrived on her phone. The screen lit the counter in a pale square. She turned it over without reading. Across town, the portable speaker would have been packed away, the grill scrubbed to a respectable shine. The cobbler would be remembered, perhaps as an extra sweetness no one had asked for. Evelyn turned off the kitchen light and listened to the house breathe. She could still smell the sugar, faint as a promise, hovering above the sink. On the table, her purse waited with the simple, stubborn posture of an object that knows its work. To carry, to keep, to close. She rested her hand on its strap and felt the grain of the leather like a steady pulse. Then, with a decision that feels less like a leap than like stepping at last onto the ground, she spoke to the quiet room, making a sentence that fit exactly in it, no larger and no smaller than the space that needed filling. "This will be the last time I sit invisible." Rain moved across Tremont in a soft diagonal, a hush that made the neighborhood feel like a library after closing. Streetlights burned through the drizzle as Evelyn let herself into the narrow kitchen and turned the small lamp above the sink. The house received her the way old houses do, with the subtle settling of joists and the patient smell of wood that has learned every season by heart. On the counter, the glass dish from the afternoon sat rinsed and drying, its sugar scent now only a polite memory. She set her purse beside it, smoothed the towel folded over the back of a chair, and listened to the steady tap of rain on the window like knuckles that would not insist. The residue of the backyard clung to her clothes, smoke, citronella, the faint varnish of laughter that had not included her. The room held it too, a trace that made the quiet sharper. She moved with a small efficiency that had held her through grief and holidays, kettle to burner, mug to counter, tea bag to saucer. She did not light the flame. She only arranged. Outside, a car eased past, and the headlights slid across the ceiling like a tide that always recedes. The silence that followed had weight, and it traveled with her down the short hall to the bedroom, where a metal box waited at the back of the closet, steady and square as a duty. The box was not heavy, but it felt like heft. A life's filings distilled to manila and ink. She set it on the bedspread, the floral print faded to a quiet palette of long use, and worked the key that had lived for years on a ring no one else had noticed. The lid opened with a clean reluctance. Inside lay the strata of a woman's care, the certificates and letters, the stamped envelopes, the photographs in sleeves, the single paperclip that holds what cannot be held. She rested her hands on either side as if steadying a patient, then drew out the folder marked with her son's name in her own careful script. It looked like a name she had borrowed from a younger hand. There was the letter she had written years ago, folded in thirds the way she had been taught when letters mattered to the mail as much as to the recipient. She slid it open and read the sentence that had once felt like a vow and now felt like an admonition. Because you are my son. 3 words that asked nothing in return and made a door large enough for anyone to walk through without knocking. She held the paper up to the lamplight and watched the faint relief of her pen strokes, as if the page still held the pressure of her wish. She found the bank printouts, tidy as speech, the copy of the cashier's check that had moved what she had labored for into a future she wanted to believe in, the deed filings she had never examined closely because trust had made a better pillow than proof. Each page gave back a history she both recognized and missed. The kitchen clock sounded a soft click at each minute, a heartbeat that did not ask how the day had gone. She laid everything side by side until the bed looked like an unfurled map of choices. Rain deepened, drumming on the porch roof in a cadence older than any argument. In that sound, the afternoon replayed without the distractions. The way Daniel's toes had floated just above the table and not landed where it should, the precise curve of Melissa's mouth as if it had learned a polite apology it would never need. She thought of Rachel's glance sliding off her like light off a window at night. The memory arrived without judgment, only with the ordinary clarity of weather seen from indoors. She carried the folder to the kitchen table, where the lamp made a small stage. She found a pad of paper and drew a single circle like the rim of a cup, then wrote the phrase that had turned itself over and over since the gate latch clicked behind her. No more excuses. She underlined it once, a line straight as a measure of fabric. She let the pen rest. The air in the room changed the way it changes when the storm wavers, more weight than rain. The telephone on the pantry shelf remained still, a neutral animal. The urge to call someone was a muscle she had overused for years and had lately taught to lie down. She did not want consolation. She wanted a clean line from decision to action. She folded the old letter and put it back into the folder. Not to forgive it, not to punish it, but to return it to its time. Then she took a pale blue card from the small file of practical things dentist, plumber, the woman who hand-panned so well, you almost forgave the bill, and found the number she had stored there after a winter bridge night when names and professions had threaded the table with easy talk. Margaret Lawson, estate attorney, Shaker Heights. The call connected on the second ring, a surprise at this hour. A calm voice answered with the quiet authority of a person who knows where every document lives in the tower of drawers. Margaret recognized her name without the fuss of small talk. Evelyn explained less than a paragraph of facts in a paragraph of breath. The lawyer did not pry into feelings. She asked only for the relevant nouns. Appointment, morning, bring everything. The words sat like stepping stones across a stream. Evelyn wrote them down even though memory had them already, because writing is the oldest form of walking. When the line clicked off, the house seemed to lean in closer, as if it had not expected her to reach beyond its walls tonight. She put the pen back into its place and lifted the box again, returning it to the closet as one returns a sleeping child to bed. In the hall, the series of pale rectangles where family photographs once hung caught her eye, little ghost windows where sun had never found the paint. She touched one with the flat of her palm and felt the coolness, as if the wall still held the absence like a temperature. Back in the kitchen, the kettle waited, but the need for tea had passed. Another need had arrived, and she was not used to it yet. The ring softened, then gathered again. A conversation carried down the block by gutters. The phone buzzed softly on the table, An unfamiliar number this late would have been cause for vigilance. This number was familiar enough to make caution feel like a discipline. She let it pass. She lifted the blinds a finger's width and looked down at the quiet street. The maple across the sidewalk wore the weather without complaint. The small clock over the stove marked a late hour in patient words if anyone had asked it to speak. She almost smiled at the thought, the absurd decency of a clock that would tell time in a voice gentle enough not to wake the house. She closed the blinds again and drew the pad of paper closer. Under the looped sentence, she listed what Margaret would ask for: copies of the power of attorney, the will, beneficiaries on the accounts, the letter she had written, the evidence of what she still controlled. She numbered nothing. She wrote each item in full. She left space between lines as if space itself were a tool she could set between events. The rain paused. Into the pause, a call came that was not a call. The phone purred with the vibration of a message. She did not read it. She found another card from a different Stack Dorothy's name in ink that had bled slightly when it met the paper years ago. And she hesitated. Friendship asks only what it can carry. Tonight, she would not hand it the weight of evidence. Instead, she pressed the card between the pages of a recipe book, opened to banana bread, and left it there like a leaf kept for the sweetness of its shape. She washed a single teacup and placed it upside down on the drying mat beside the dish. She wiped the rim of the sink. These motions, the small restorations, made sleep a place she could enter later without tripping. The kitchen chair creaked when she settled into it again. Familiar complaint, easy to forgive. She pictured Margaret's office in the morning. The smooth desk, the tidy stacks, the certificate on the wall that tells the world a person is permitted to be trusted. She pictured the walkway to the door, the hydrangeas if the groundskeeper had thought to plant them, the bowl of peppermint on a low table, the polite pen with a cap that always find the pen again. She rehearsed the conversation the way one rehearses a hymn not heard since childhood. Revoke the power of attorney. Amend the will. Remove Daniel from every line where his name rides on hers as he found a borrowed bus pass. She thought of the young teller at the credit union who had once complimented her gloves. She thought of the way authority shifts when a person notices she's being managed instead of respected. The realization felt less like an anger than like a correction. The kind a careful seamstress makes with a small pair of scissors and a steady hand. The house yawned. Somewhere upstairs, the radiator ticked as if agreeing. She rose and walked to the closet one last time. On the top shelf, next to the box of old Christmas ornaments, sat a shoebox labeled with a year written in a marker that had been bolder then. Inside lay cards her husband had brought home from the hardware store on his lunch breaks, their fronts with pictures of tools and sailboats and winter scenes, their insides blank or nearly so. She did not take them out. She only closed the closet gently and stood for a moment in the smell of cedar hangers and clean cotton. The rain returned with less conviction. She turned off the kitchen lamp and left the table to its lists. In the bedroom, she drew back the covers and lay on her side, facing the window, where the faint trapezoid of streetlight turned the curtains into a pale ghost of day. Sleep did not argue with her. It arrived like a polite guest, on time and self-contained. Morning belonged to the practical. Light cleared the edges of the room at an hour the clock would have called early if clocks were free to editorialize. She dressed in the order that made the most sense to hands that had done it for decades. Slacks, blouse, cardigan with buttons that remembered Sunday mornings. At the mirror, she pressed a comb gently along the part in her hair and watched the woman who looked back with the level kindness one reserves for a stranger who seems familiar. In the kitchen, the banana on the counter had ripened a shade beyond modest. She ate toast instead and drank water from a glass, because there are mornings when plainness is a comfort. She gathered the folder into her purse, added a small notebook and a good pen, then checked again for the keys she had already felt twice. Outside, Tremont breathed a damp cool, the kind that makes the neighborhood feel freshly laundered. The drive to Shaker Heights crossed a seam of the city that always felt like a change of tempo. Bridges over tracks, brick to stone, small storefronts to lawns that held themselves carefully. The parking lot held an orderly selection of sensible sedans. She chose a space that would let her leave without negotiation. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon, cleaner, and paper. A receptionist with a tidy bun and a sweater the color of oatmeal looked up and smiled, the practiced smile of someone who knows she is the first voice a person hears in a building where hard things are decided. The chair Evelyn chose gave a little beneath her, a civilized cushion that suggested kindness to bones. A bowl of peppermints sat near a stack of magazines that no one ever truly reads. Squares of light from the high windows lay on the carpet like folded napkins waiting for plates. Margaret entered without hurry, a woman assembled from quiet fabrics and the confidence of long familiarity with other people's thresholds. Her handshake was precisely the temperature of the room. In her office, the hum of a printer and the soft shuffle of files replaced the world's louder sounds. Margaret opened the folder with Evelyn's name and listened as if listening were a tool as essential as the pen. Evelyn placed each document where asked. Here, the old letter. Here, the copy of the check. Here, the power of attorney that once had felt like prudence. Here, the will that had assumed time would behave. It's all legal, Margaret said in a voice that did not apologize for the truth. You gifted it. A beat, just long enough to let a fact sit without bruising. But you still have other powers. The sentence made a small space inside Evelyn expand, as if a window had been nudged open. Margaret explained the steps without drama. The revocation to prepare and notarize, the amendments to the will removing Daniel from the executor's chair and from any residuary bequests, the list for the credit union and the insurance carrier to adjust beneficiaries, the advisability of a trust later if the property needed cleaner lines. She wrote the plan in clean handwriting that left room in the margins for breathing. Evelyn signed where the firm woman at the printer pointed, the blue ink making statements that did not tremble. Her hand moved with the steadiness of a seam running true. The phrases she read matched the phrases Margaret had spoken. The words made a road that did not require faith to walk. When the notary's stamp kissed the paper, it sounded like a rubber shoe on the school gym floor. A reassuring small squeak that said the game had rules. This isn't revenge, Evelyn said, not as a challenge, but as a measuring. This is repair. Margaret nodded, the kind of nod that grants a benediction without assuming the right to bless. She slid the completed pages into a folder with clean edges and put a paperclip at the top, an ordinary coronation. I'll have a checklist for you at the front, she said. Accounts, insurance, medical directives. It will feel like tidying a drawer. Call me if anything snags. Oh, at the desk by the door, the receptionist handed Evelyn a stapled packet with the cheerful gravity of someone passing a program before a concert. Peppermints clicked in a glass bowl. Evelyn took one and slipped it into her purse, not for sweetness, but because the gesture completed the scene. Outside, the sky had set its face to clearing, the rain in retreat the way apologies sometimes are, late and light. Back in the car, she sat for a moment without turning the key. The steering wheel was warm. The documents on the passenger seat rested like a small animal that trusted her. A flock of starlings turned above the parking lot with the kind of collective intelligence that makes one forgive the flock for the noise it will make later. She drove home through neighborhoods that returned her in the reverse order of departure, one familiar block at a time. Dorothy called as the turn signal ticked for the last corner. The voice on the other end carried the warmth of someone who never asks, "Do you have a minute?" because she assumes the minute will be made together. Dorothy offered to bring over a loaf from the Italian bakery and a small story about the woman at the counter who has learned everyone's birthday by heart. Evelyn said, "Another time," and meant it, and Dorothy laughed softly and said, "Lines, dear. You are drawing them." The word dear landed without patronizing. It sounded like a ribbon placed where it belongs. At home, sunlight found the kitchen tile and made it a shade bluer than usual. She spread the checklist on the table and began to script the afternoon, the credit union before closing, the call to the insurance agent who would place her on hold and then apologize in a voice trained to locate inconvenience before it grew teeth, the notes to herself to change passwords and security questions to things only she would love enough to remember. The kettle finally earned its flame. She made tea she would drink. The day slid into its tasks with the softness of a well-stitched seam. She moved through rooms and papers, through lists and phone trees, through the small grievances of contemporary life that always resolve if patience is held like a steady lantern. At the credit union, the manager's office was glassed in and kind. The woman who helped her wore a cardigan the color of moss and called her Miss Parker in a way that suggested respect instead of distance. Forms were filled and cancelled, access removed, alerts and locks placed as if tucking a child into bed and checking the windows twice. The manager offered to set up a trust when she was ready. Soon, Evelyn said, and found that the word did not pretend. By the time the sun lowered toward the west and put polish on the edges of the buildings, the lists had shortened to the pleasure of crossing through a last line. She set the pen beside the pad and walked to the sink to rinse her cup. The house, which had listened all day, exhaled. There are days when the ordinary is a sacrament. She stood in one. She wiped the counter where a ring of moisture had suggested negligence and then disappeared, reformed as a clean square that caught the light. The phone on the table shivered against the wood, a small fish catching air. She dried her hands and reached for it, expecting a telemarketer with a cheerful script, or Dorothy again with a detail she had forgotten to share. The screen lit her palm. A message weighted with the bluntness of family. No greeting, no cushion, all assertion. It arrived on the heels of the day's repairs as if summoned by the scent of change. Mom, Melissa didn't mean it, don't take it serious. Sun pooled in the quiet lobby like warm milk, smoothing the edges of framed diplomas and the neat potted fern by the window. The receptionist looked up with a practiced kindness, wrote Evelyn's name on a tiny clipboard line, and offered water in a paper cup with a scalloped rim. The building smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and new paper, the domestic version of order. She sat on a chair with a civilized cushion and folded her hands over her purse, the way one waits when the next step has already been chosen. Through the glass, traffic in Shaker Heights moved at a gentle pace that suggested the city had agreed, at least for this morning, to be reasonable. The office door opened, and a woman in quiet fabric stepped out, a soft thread of peppermint following her like good manners. Margaret Lawson carried a folder without fuss, as if every folder contained the same promise. There will be a path. She greeted Evelyn with a handshake that matched the room's temperature, and led her down a short hall where the carpet asked for small, respectful footsteps. In the office, morning light lay across a desk in a pale rectangle, showing the precise distance between a capped blue pen, a stack of documents, and a ceramic mug that said nothing about anyone's personality. A dish of mints rested beside a coaster, the kind of courtesy that does not try to be memorable. The chair on Evelyn's side of the desk gave slightly when she sat, then held. Margaret opened a legal pad, poised her pen, and listened with the kind of attention that arranges itself like tools in a tray. Names, dates, and the simple geometry of what had been given and what remained formed a clean lattice as Evelyn spoke. The words she offered were trimmed the afternoon in Lakewood did not enter. Even the cobbler stayed home in her sink. Decisions, not explanations, mattered here. When Evelyn placed the folder from her purse on the desk, she did it with both hands, the way she might set down a sleeping infant, present, careful, complete. Margaret turned pages with a pianist's economy. "Here is your existing power of attorney," she said in a voice that lifted only as high as necessary. "And here is your will as it stands. You have the right to change these. Will revoke the first, amend the second, and notify the appropriate institutions. It's straightforward. It simply requires that we be thorough." The word thorough landed like a folded blanket on the back of a chair, domestic and reassuring. She uncapped the blue pen, drew a short line in the margin, and wrote a neat list. Revoke authority, amend executor, adjust beneficiaries, update healthcare directives, notify credit union and insurer. A small printer purred someplace beyond the half wall. At the door, a paralegal stepped in with a notary kit and the polite confidence of someone who knows where to place a stamp. Margaret slid a fresh document across the desk and tilted it so the light favored the signature line. "This revokes the prior power of attorney," she said. "Sign here and here." I'll read the attestation for the record. The script was ceremonial without being theatrical, the ceremony of kitchens and good contracts rather than tuxedos and vows. Evelyn read what she was asked to read, signed what she was asked to sign. The pen moved steady, the ink the color of lake water in late afternoon. Margaret's explanations were spare and practical. Your son was named as executor, she said, tapping a line that looked harmless until it wasn't. If you prefer someone else, we make that change. It does not need to be complicated. The law respects clarity. She turned another sheet. Beneficiaries on accounts are updated directly with each institution. Well, print a checklist. I recommend you keep a folder labeled with today's date and a short note to yourself so you remember where the thread begins. She smiled in the way competent people do when they do not need their smile to be a second argument. On the desk, the notary pressed the raised seal with a modest firmness. The sound that followed was a small, rubber-kissed squeak, like a gym shoe pivoting on polished wood. It gave the room a momentary echo of childhood rules, lines that, once drawn, made the game fair. Evelyn exhaled without noticing that she had held the breath at all. Across the city, somewhere she could not see, a television called balls and strikes to a different morning. Here, the present arranged itself, paper by paper, into a legible future. Margaret summarized the plan and slid a stapled packet across the desk credit union contact, insurance number, a note about health proxies, and a gentle reminder about passwords. We can formalize a trust later, if the property will move, she said. For today, we make sure control sits where it belongs. Evelyn's purse sat open on her lap like an attentive dog. From its inner pocket, she took the small notebook that had shepherded grocery lists and hymn suggestions and phone trees through many ordinary years. Under the date written out in full, she copied Margaret's list in plain words, separated by widely spaced lines, leaving room for her own notations. She did not abbreviate. She wrote in a hand that made each letter responsible for itself. The past she carried was not invited to dispute the present tense. The receptionist knocked once and entered with a tray that held a white mug and a second dish of mints, this one in foil wrappers that shine like small, patient fishes. Tea? She asked, and the word was less a question than an offering shaped by habit. The steam rose with a mint note, clean and kind. Margaret sipped. Evelyn did not. She wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth answer a chill that had not, until now, confessed itself. On the credenza, a silver-framed certificate reported that Margaret had been admitted to practice in a year Evelyn still thought of as recent. The inked seal and serifed words offered no opinion on daughters-in-law or picnic tables. They promised only that the person seated here had learned how to put loose lives into stacks that stand up. The hum of the printer settled back to silence. Outside the window, a maple leaf fluttered and then succumbed to the decision gravity makes for all of us. When Margaret asked, "Would you like to remove your son as executor?" the answer stepped forward as if it had been standing just behind Evelyn's shoulder, waiting its turn. "Yes," she said. No quaver, no quarrel. It was the yes of closing the door gently and turning the deadbolt, because the house deserves to sleep. They reviewed the amended page together. Daniel's name moved from a line that had offered him a seat at the head of her affairs to a place where the paper did not need his letters anymore. Margaret initialed the margin where law asked for a witness. The paralegal initialed another. Evelyn lifted the pen again and wrote her initials in a way that did not apologize for being small. A second seal kissed the page. The blue ink settled into the paper as if it had always planned to live there. "Next," Margaret said, with the relief that comes of ordered steps, "are the beneficiaries. You go to the credit union. We'll give you a letter. They'll remove any joint access and update pay on death designations. Insurance, the same. Healthcare directives will refresh so that the person who answers a hospital phone speaks your wishes, not someone else's convenience." She slid a prepared letter across the desk with a paperclip at the top. "If the clerk looks uncertain, have them call me. I like to be dialed," she added, the smallest flicker of humor allowed into the room. Evelyn nodded. At that nod, an interior weight moved from the middle of her chest to somewhere the body accommodates what it will gladly carry. She set the mug down and met Margaret's gaze. "This isn't revenge. This is repair." The sentence steadied the air. It made a bridge over a narrow water. Margaret did not decorate the moment. She accepted it. "That's exactly right," she said, and closed the folder with the finality of a well-fitted lid. "Take your time at the credit union. Bring identification. Ask for a manager if the line teller is busy. When you leave there, treat yourself to something decent for lunch. It was an instruction dressed as a kindness, or a kindness dressed as an instruction. Either way, a good code for the day. At the reception desk, the stapled packet waited, a map that had already folded itself along the needed creases. The receptionist stood to pass it over, and a peppermint clicked against the glass as if to say, "Go on then." Evelyn slid the packet into her purse, thanked the woman by name, and stepped back into the hall where the carpet was grateful for unhurried feet. Outside, the weather had committed itself to sun. In the parking lot, a careful row of sedans flashed their muted paints, content to be useful. She sat behind the wheel without turning the key and let the moment lengthen. Papers rested on the passenger seat, obedient and brave. A pair of starlings twisted like ribbon in the sky and then unclasped. Across the way, a woman her age walked a small, dignified dog that did not try to improve anyone's morning. The ordinary announced itself on all channels. A mail truck easing to the curb, a school bell in the middle distance. The smell of cut grass rolled thin under the larger smell of sunshine. On the drive back toward Tremont, she allowed herself the simple arithmetic of the afternoon. Credit union first, then insurance, then a call to the family doctor's office for the healthcare forms, then a note to herself to change the answers to security questions into small, private jokes no one else could guess. The title of a song Frank loved when no one else did. The name of a street that no longer exists. The exact shade she called her mother's favorite dress. Each item took its place, not rushed, not delayed. There is a tempo at which repairs hold. At a long light near the rapid tracks, her phone buzzed in her bag. The small domestic burr of something wanting attention. She let it be. The light turned and she moved with the other cars past a stand of late hydrangeas slouching under their own insistence. The city borrowed the color of lake water and gave it back to the sky. Home was a few turns and habitual parking space away. In the kitchen, she spread the checklist on the table like a placemat for the meal work makes. The phone, now free of the purse, vibrated once more against the wood. She glanced at the screen because discipline does not forbid awareness. The name on the message was as familiar as her own handwriting. She did not open it. She finished reading the line about how to address beneficiary forms if a clerk was new. Only then did she unlock the screen and touch the message. Not because messages deserve first place, but because order has its own manners. Don't make a fool of yourself, Evelyn. We are family. Sunday light lay thin and kind across Lakewood, the sort of early fall brightness that makes a living room look freshly dusted no matter what has been missed. On the mantel, a spray of silk hydrangeas pretended to be summer. The coffee table bore rings from cups that had not met coasters, and 2 paper cups from Starbucks leaned against a stack of mail as if they had grown tired of being modern. The air kept a faint perfume of leftover pizza, oregano and pepperoni, drifting in and out like a memory with poor boundaries. In the kitchen, the Keurig hummed to itself in small mechanical sighs, warming water for a second act. Before Evelyn rang the bell, her phone vibrated once. Patricia's name glowed on the screen, and the voice that had steadied her through funerals and flu seasons offered a brief benediction. Lines hold when they're drawn with a sure hand. Evelyn said, "Thank you." She put the phone away. The folder in her arm met her ribs with the mild pressure of something that belongs there. The door opened on Daniel's practiced smile, the one he had worn since late childhood when adults asked for proof of good manners. He stood back as if politeness could make space do what it does in houses that are too full. "Come in, Mom," he said, and stepped aside. Melissa's voice floated from the living room, that particular brightness people reserve for company they want to impress and relatives they intend to manage. Rachel sat at the far end of the couch with her hands folded over her knees and her eyes on a point that did not require participation. The television was dark, but its black rectangle made a mirror of the room, showing everyone who they were when they thought they were only themselves. There was a round of greetings too short to deserve the plural. A coaster was nudged an inch near the nearest Starbucks cup, as if intention counted. Melissa gestured toward the armchair opposite the couch. "Please," she said, and the word arrived with all the welcome of a speed limit. Evelyn sat, placed the folder on her lap, and kept both hands on it as one keeps hands on a tray, one means to carry without tilting. Daniel perched on the ottoman, knees apart, a host improvising furniture. Melissa began with a question that did not require an answer. "We were surprised to hear you've been making changes," she said. and her tone shaped the word changes into something that would stain a shirt. We can all agree that these are not the kinds of decisions to make when feelings are running high. She smiled. A hospitable crescent. We're family. The word held the room like a placard. Daniel nodded. We just want to make sure you're okay, he added, eyes searching the carpet for a path that would carry him between loyalty and logistics. If there's confusion about anything, we can slow down. Confusion is very human, Melissa said, turning the kindness up a notch as if twisting a dimmer. After all, there have been so many documents over the years. Banking, the will, the house. It's a lot for anyone to track. Why don't we put everything on the table and talk like grown-ups? She traced a fingertip over a magazine, aligning it with the edge of the coffee table, the way people do when they want the world to obey. Evelyn watched the small domestic theater arrange itself, Melissa folding her legs and setting her phone face down as if to demonstrate attention. Daniel reaching for a paper napkin and smoothing it without reason. Rachel going still the way young people do when they hope stillness will make them invisible. The silk hydrangeas on the mantel did not wither. The Keurig exhaled one last sigh. In the kitchen, a light clicked off. From the house next door came the bark of a small dog who objected to squirrels as a matter of policy. The room waited to be told what it already knew. Thank you for making time, Evelyn said, and set the folder on the coffee table, clearing a spot between the Starbucks cups and the bowl that had once held party mix. She unclipped the metal clasp, not hurried, not slow, and lifted the first document. The paper had the respectable weight of something that had invited a seal. She placed it face up for all to see. This revokes the prior power of attorney, she said in a voice that had learned authority from recipes, checklists, and a lifetime of Sunday mornings where the words matter because they are said in the right order, signed and notarized. Melissa's mouth moved as if she had bitten a seed. That seems unnecessary, she said. We only ever wanted to help. Evelyn nodded as a person nods at weather. Acknowledgement without agreement. She set down the second sheet. This is the amendment to my will, she continued. It names someone else as executor and removes any residuary bequests that might have been assumed. The word assumed wore no sarcasm. It was as clean as a white plate. Daniel's fingers found the napkin's torn corner. Mom, we can talk about this, he said, his voice breaking gently on the talk, as if it had encountered a small rock in a shallow stream. You know, none of this was about. Evelyn laid a letter folded once, then unfolded it. The blue ink steady as late afternoon water. This is the notice to the credit union, she said, removing joint access and updating beneficiaries. The manager has a copy. If there are questions, they will call my attorney. She looked up and met both sets of eyes, one restless, one hard. I would like those questions to go to her, not to me. And sold. Melissa laughed the way people laugh when they want to keep the floor but have run out of rug. You brought an attorney into this, she said, not asking. Mother, honestly. Evelyn? Evelyn said, with a small correction that did not raise its voice. She placed a slim packet beside the others. And here is the signed agreement to sell the house. She let the sentence rest, then set a final page on top, a page with numbers expressed in words and a signature that had not wavered. Proceeds are designated for a charitable trust benefiting the women's shelter. The paperwork is in motion. For a heartbeat, the house listened to its own wires. Then Melissa leaned forward, palms up, an actress accepting applause from an audience she does not trust. This feels cruel, she said. It feels like a performance. We have only ever wanted what's best for you, and now you show up with a folder like a school teacher and grade us in our own living room. Will you think about Rachel? About the message this sends? Evelyn turned to her granddaughter and saw a face trying to grow in two directions at once. I am thinking about her, she said. I am thinking about what we teach when we say one thing and do another. She returned her gaze to Melissa, then to Daniel, whose eyes had fled to the silk hydrangeas as if plastic petals could offer counsel. This is not a punishment. This is a boundary. It keeps what belongs to me with me until I decide where it goes. Daniel spread his hands, helpless semaphore. We toasted to family last week, he said, an appeal to ritual, the last refuge of people surprised by change. You heard me. I did, Evelyn said. I noticed you didn't look at me. Silence found the room and pulled a chair up for itself. Somewhere deep in the house, the furnace clicked despite the season, the way old systems do when they try to remember their jobs. Melissa shifted, then straightened, then polished her voice. "What you're doing," she said, "is erasing family." Evelyn reached for the sentence that had been waiting all morning, the one that had formed itself somewhere between Shaker Heights and this couch. "I am not erasing family. I am choosing myself." The words did not arrive as a shout or a plea. They arrived with the weight of a door that closes cleanly on its latch. The silk hydrangeas kept their color. The Starbucks cups tilted a little more toward resignation. Daniel blinked, discovering uselessness, as if he had found a new room in a familiar house and did not know where the light switch was. Melissa's face struggled to find the expression that would turn the moment back to an earlier page. It could not. In the gap that opened, small and honest, the ordinary sounds returned. A car rolling by, the neighbor's dog forgiving the squirrel, a spoon shifting in the sink. Rachel's hands left her knees and clasped each other as if they needed company. She drew a breath that made her ribcage look briefly too small for the work it had to do. She stood, not with drama, but with the simple verticality of a person who has found the line she can live on, and she looked first at her grandmother and then at the people who had taught her words without teaching her their weight. "Grandma, I need to say something." Rain stitched the afternoon into one quiet piece, a fine gray lace working its way across Ohio City and settling against Evelyn's windows with a patient hush. The kitchen carried the gentle warmth of a loaf cooling on the wire rack, banana bread breathing out cinnamon and soft promise. A lamp over the sink made a small golden pool on the counter, and in that pool the mug and plate waited as if they had been set for a lesson in kindness. The building's hallway gave up the sound of a bicycle chain shaking once and going still, and then the soft tread of careful feet. When the knock came, it was not insistent. It sounded like a question that wanted to live. Evelyn opened the door to a girl who was no longer quite a child and not yet anything as settled as an adult. Rachel stood with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a sketch pad pressed to her chest, Rain holding to the ends of her ponytail like a secret not yet told. She said hello in a voice that knew it had come to the right place but was not sure how to begin. The bike leaned against the metal railing of the shared balcony, a faithful machine with the scuffs and history of 1,000 errands. Evelyn stepped back, palm open, and Rachel came in on the look people wear when they have come to return something they cannot name. The kitchen was a room built for weather like this, small enough to keep company with itself, tidy enough that nothing needed to be apologized for. Evelyn set a plate on the table and cut 2 slices from the loaf, letting crumbs fall where they wished. The knife tapped a rhythm as old as every kitchen. Steam lifted, she poured tea into 2 mugs and folded a napkin once for each. Rachel shrugged off the backpack and rested the sketchpad on the chair as if it had bones, then stood a beat too long as if permission were the door that had not quite opened. Evelyn nodded toward the chair. "Sit," she said softly, and the word was not instruction so much as a welcome made into sound. They ate a few quiet bites, the way people do when bread is doing the first work of repair. Rain braided itself more tightly against the windows. Somewhere in the courtyard, a neighbor's laundry line snapped and then fell still again. In the small pause between sips of tea, Rachel looked down at her hands, then up, and found the gaze that had always been there for her even when she had not chosen to meet it. "I'm sorry," she said, plain as a new sheet of paper. The words did not wobble. They did not seek credit. "At the party, at the library, I saw you and I pretended I didn't, because it was easier. Because I thought being cool meant not being kind. Because they were watching." She took a breath and let it out the way a person lowers a box they have carried too far. Evelyn felt the apology settle in the room the way dust settles in a shaft of light visible, gentle, inevitable. She had no speech waiting, no rehearsed absolution. She reached for the knife and cut another slice, not to fill the mouth, but to show how ordinary gestures could hold extraordinary things. "Thank you," she said. The 2 words made a path wide enough for both of them. Rachel reached for the sketchpad as if it were a friend she needed to introduce. "I brought you something," she said, cheeks coloring not with embarrassment but with the heat of wanting to get it right. She set the pad on the table and lifted the cover. On the top sheet lay a chessboard drawn in black pencil, the squares shaded with the patience of someone who knows repetition is the only way to arrive. On one side of the board stood a king and a pawn, small as figures in a distant field. On the other side, more pieces were scattered in a position that would have looked confident to anyone who did not know the game. In the lower corner, she had written a small notation in careful letters. The kind art teachers encourage when they teach young hands to sign their work. Evelyn leaned closer. She was not a chess player, but she had spent enough Saturdays watching Frank nudge wooden pieces across a battered board to recognize the angle of advantage when it appeared. The two small figures on the left were enough. They were more than enough if you knew how to use them. She felt a smile arrive from somewhere older than the weather and lighter than her cardigan. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's you," Rachel said. The pronoun not a risk so much as a delivery. Everybody thinks you don't have enough, but you do, if you move the right way. Evelyn let the truth of that sit in her chest until it found the chair it needed. She rested her fingertips just beyond the edge of the paper, careful not to smug the graphite. "May I keep it?" "It's for you," Rachel said, as if the sentence had been practicing for a week and at last had found its hour. They looked at the board together, not as student and judge, but as two people reading a map that had the grace to include the road they were already on. The tea cooled, the rain kept its promise. The banana bread slid into the work of becoming a memory they could share later without the ache that so many memories carry. Rachel told small stories the way young people do when they are home enough to let the small be enough. The art teacher who kept spare pencil sharpeners in a jar labeled in case of emergencies, the boy in English who could not stop saying the word ostensibly because he had only just learned it, the librarian who wore a brooch shaped like a moth and said it was there to remind her not to fly into light that burns. Evelyn listened and let the stories knock softly against the places where large stories had once knocked too hard. She offered another slice and Rachel accepted, and in the acceptance, something like trust returned to the table without fanfare. When the talking paused, silence held its unfrightening hands out and offered room to breathe. Evelyn cleared the plates and rinsed them under a tap that knew how to be gentle. Rachel wiped the small trail of crumbs with her fingertips and gathered them the way children gather pebbles for no reason, except that gathering is its own goodness. The lamp kept its circle of attention over the sink. On the balcony, the bicycle frame beaded with rain like a bright instrument waiting for music. "I almost said something yesterday," Rachel said. After a while, the confession, not a plea. "When you were at the house, I wanted to. She searched for a word that would not make an excuse of explaining. I froze." Evelyn dried her hands and took her chair again. "Sometimes freezing is the body's way of telling the truth," she said. "It says, I do not know the next step yet. It gives us a beat to find a better one." "I don't want to be the person who freezes," Rachel said. "You won't be," Evelyn answered. Not because she believed time handled all promises, but because she recognized the line of desire running through the girl like a plumb line. "You came." Rachel nodded, as if the nod sealed something paper could not. She slid the sketch pad closer and uncapped the pencil from a tin. "Can I add one thing?" she asked. "Because permission is a language you learn if someone has bothered to teach you." Evelyn nodded. Rachel drew a tiny crown above the pawn, the suggestion of a future that lay inside the rules, even if it looked like magic to those who did not play. "My teacher says pawns can become queens," she said, "if they get to the other side." Evelyn felt the ridiculous and the holy meet for a breath and found herself laughing not at Rachel but with her, with the board, with the sheen on the bicycle and the steam that had been tea. "She's not done," Evelyn said, not certain whether she meant the pawn, the girl, or the woman at the table. "She's just starting to play her game." They let the sentence ring like a bell and then rest. The quiet afterward did not need to be filled. Rachel returned the cap to the pencil with the exact care that makes small things last. The neighbor across the courtyard opened a door and shook a rug. Rain gave it back with a silver hiss. A siren far downtown threaded its lone line through the city and then frayed into distance. Rachel zipped the backpack without urgency and tucked the sketchpad inside, leaving the drawn page on the table exactly where it belonged. "I should go before the rain turns mean," she said, the practical speaking alongside the tender. "Dad will be home soon." "Thanks." Evelyn stood too and reached for the chamois she used to dry the inside of the helmet when the weather was like this. a small ceremony that asked nothing but delivered usefulness anyway. She handed it over without a speech attached. Rachel took it and smiled with her eyes more than her mouth. They paused by the door the way people pause when leaving a place that has become a little more theirs than it was an hour before. The hallway smelled of wet concrete and laundry soap. The bicycle blinked a tiny reflector like a wink that did not risk being misunderstood. At the threshold, Rachel turned, and the turn held all the practice a life so far could gather: school mornings, gym doors, 1,000 entrances where what you wanted had to wait in line behind what was expected. Her face was younger than what it had seen and older than what it had been given credit for. She glanced past Evelyn at the table where the chessboard lay, and then back up into the steadiness that had just been offered to her as a home. Grandma, I don't want to live like them when I'm older. Morning slid into the new apartment like a friendly tide, washing the walls in a pale light that made bare rooms look deliberate rather than incomplete. Boxes wore thick black marker names, kitchen, linens, books stacked in little neighborhoods that would, with patience, become a home. A lake breeze threaded through the screen door and moved the sheer curtains in a quiet rhythm, as if the room were breathing with Evelyn. From the hallway came the careful bootfalls of movers and the soft rattle of dollies easing over thresholds. The building itself listened with the tolerant interest of old Ohio City brick. The crew worked with a choreography born of repetition. One man guided the sofa through the turn with a murmured count. Another ferried a lamp held like a slender heron. The youngest balanced a stack of framed prints against his shoulder with the solemn focus usually reserved for weddings. Evelyn kept a small table set with paper cups, a pitcher of water, and a plate of grocery store muffins that looked better than they tasted. She signed the final line on the invoice in neat letters that had learned long ago how to stand on their own, then pressed folded bills into the foreman's hand. The cash fell right in her palm, a thank you that did not require a receipt. For lunch, she said, and he nodded with the grateful brevity of a man who knows the value of being seen. When the last dolly squeaked into the elevator, the hallway exhaled. The apartment, for a heartbeat, was only hers. Angela Torres knocked once and came in with a small, potted, succulent cup in both hands like a ceremonial candle. "Welcome home," she said. The plants sat in a clay pot, hand-painted with an irregular blue stripe that refused to be anything but cheerful. Angela pointed out the trash room and the laundry hours, the way the afternoon sun makes a small stage in the corner by the bookshelf. She offered a card with her number written carefully and the sentence that matters most when strangers are making a neighborhood together. "If you need anything, truly." They talked about the farmer's market on West 25th Street and the bakery near the bridge and the best time to find parking when the game lets out. When she left, the apartment felt less like a place and more like a promise someone else believed in too. Evelyn opened boxes in a sequence that matched how a day is built. Mugs before books, towels before framed photos, sheets before the lamps that would read them. The first tea kettle hissed and clicked on the new stove as if pleased to be invited. She wiped the counters with slow strokes that made room not only for dishes, but for whatever it is that occupies the air in a home when no one is looking. On the balcony, the railing held a thin stripe of sun the width of a good pencil. She laid the dish towel there to dry, a small flag beginning its watch. Late morning carried her across town to a doorway she had seen in photographs and articles and donation appeals, and now in person looked exactly like what hope looks like when it rents a building. The sign read, "Women's Shelter of Greater Cleveland," in letters that meant business. Inside, the lobby held chairs that had been chosen for comfort rather than style, a bulletin board studded with flyers that told honest truth support groups, job leads, clothing drives, a free clinic on Thursday afternoons. At the front desk, a woman in a cardigan, the color of strong coffee, greeted Evelyn by name, which felt, in that setting, like a benediction, earned not by money but by intention. They did not make a production of it, and that was a production Evelyn preferred. She wrote the amount in words on the line where words matter, then signed with the same steadiness she had brought to other pages. The director, a woman with the rested eyes of someone who has learned to sleep even on hard weeks, shook her hand. "Thank you," she said. "You are moving more than numbers." In a small room off the lobby, a corkboard displayed names under a heading that avoided the word donor in favor of something humbler. Neighbors who give. A volunteer pinned a simple card with Evelyn's name there, no larger than anyone else's. A few residents passed through with the distracted grace of people gathering courage between appointments. The air carried laundry soap and a faint trace of crayons. Beyond the open doorway, a child laughed the way children do when they have found, for a moment, something safe to be. There was a short acknowledgement, just as she had hoped. No microphone, no camera phone glow, only quiet words in a circle. The director explained how the funds would stretch across beds and hot showers and the shoes that make interviews possible. Evelyn listened, not for the credit, but for the details that prove sincerity. A staffer pressed into her hand a tiny white sticker that said, "Thank you," in letters so small they could almost be a secret, and for a second she thought of the labels she used to put on jars in her pantry and felt the lovely sense that order can sometimes be kindness in disguise. She left lighter than she had arrived, as if something she had carried for years had finally found the right shelf. Back at the apartment, the light had shifted toward afternoon and made the hallway rug look like a field seen from a low-flying plane. She set the kettle again and smiled at the absurdity of a life measured in boiled water, then embraced the wisdom in it. Dorothy arrived first, humming the fragment of a hymn and holding a paper bag from the Italian bakery that scented the room with anise and fennel. Helen followed with a tin of buttered cookies whose lid bore a picture of a harbor no one had ever identified correctly. Patricia came last, carrying a small jar of marmalade and a newspaper folded to the crossword, her eyes bright with the mischief of a clue she had already solved. They kissed cheeks in the old-fashioned way and commented on the view as if the skyline had been arranged for their visit. They did not need a ceremony to make it a tea. They made it a tea by being the kinds of women who remember to bring napkins even when napkins have already been set. Cups warmed under their palms. The talk wove itself through topics with an intelligence that did not apologize for skipping the unimportant. Dorothy described a neighbor's polite tomato theft and an apology pie that had followed. Helen relayed the tale of a bus driver who refused to let a passenger cry alone. Patricia reported with secular awe that the barista at Phoenix Coffee had learned her order and had drawn a heart in the foam, as if anyone needed proof that small gestures still patrol the edges. They devoted the correct amount of time to health blood pressure and knees, and the way certain medicines declare their loyalty by making one thirsty and then returned, gratefully, to books and recipes, and who might be persuaded to sing at the next church supper. Rachel's knock arrived like a comma and not a period, allowing the sentence of the afternoon to continue with better rhythm. She slipped in carrying a brown bag and the sheepish pride of someone who has remembered the exact kind of cookies a person favors. "Phoenix," she announced, not unlike a magician revealing the final card. The bag gave up the warm scent of chocolate and cardamom. The women made room for her without commentary, which was their form of ceremony for the young. Inclusion without applause. Rachel accepted the cup and sat where she could watch Evelyn move around the kitchen and memorize, without knowing she was doing it, how a table becomes a table. Boxes had disappeared as if they had never been, or had been transformed into furniture simply by agreeing to belong. On the wall above the bookcase, the drawing of the chessboard hung straight, the frame simple and sure. Rachel noticed it, and that noticing put a faint, brave shine on her face. She did not mention it. She did not need to. Evelyn laid out the bakery breads and Rachel's cookies and a small bowl of olives that had earned their place by being exactly salty enough. They ate and talked until time itself seemed to relax its rules and agree to a slower gait. When conversation thinned to contented listening, Evelyn stood by the window and took in the room, this entirely reasonable afternoon that had grown from boxes and a kettle and the careful company of women who know how to build a life out of what is left. The skyline held its outline against a pale sky. The lake kept its counsel beyond the rooftops. She felt, with a clarity that owed nothing to drama, the words that had been waiting through months of doubt. They arrived without announcement and placed themselves exactly where they belonged. They asked why I was still alive. Now I know why. The sentence did its work without needing a witness. Still, the room offered one. Rachel looked up and seemed to nod without nodding, the way young people sometimes answer when approval would embarrass them. Dorothy squeezed Evelyn's hand once and then let it go. Helen pretended she had something urgent to examine on the cookie tin, and blinked twice with unnecessary speed. Patricia cleared her throat and complained that the crossword had started using slang as if dictionaries were optional. The moment tucked itself into the day like a letter under a favorite book, safe and retrievable. Evening approached quietly, the light turning to the bare-chested gold that makes city bricks look kindly. The friends gathered their bags and their leftover jokes and promised recompense they had no need to deliver, because friendship keeps accounts differently. Angela knocked again to check whether the trash room key worked. It did, and her relief was comically proportioned to the size of the problem, which made everyone feel better about everything. Rachel washed the cups with the respectful ferocity of a volunteer who understands that some sanctuaries are made of porcelain. The apartment looked as if it had always been here, which is the highest compliment a new space can earn. When the door closed on the last visitor, the silence that settled did not feel like absence. It felt like a book set down with the intention of being picked up again soon. Evelyn walked to the little table by the entry where mail gathers itself, self-appointed and unashamed. An envelope lay there with her name written by a hand that had learned penmanship in a different decade, a hand she could have identified from a city block away. The paper had been folded over itself with the clumsy care of someone who does not write often but has decided to try. She stood very still, as if not to startle something that might break. She slid a finger under the flap and opened it slowly, not to postpone pain or hasten healing, but to keep faith with the object itself. The letter used fewer words than she would have guessed and the exact number needed. It did not dress itself in apologies it had not earned. The line that mattered most stood alone, with the cautious courage of a person at the threshold. Mom, I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. The quiet of her new home, softened by the laughter of friends and the hesitant hope of a granddaughter, carried the weight of a truth Evelyn had waited her whole life to claim. The years of silence, of being overlooked at tables where her place should have been honored, had turned into the steady resolve that finally set her free. In her courage to draw a boundary, she revealed what power really means, not control over others, but the grace to protect one's dignity and still leave room for love. The lesson lingers for all of us. Families fracture under pride and prejudice, yet they can mend when honesty and compassion take their rightful seat. And just as a single lamp left glowing in a kitchen window can guide someone safely home, the smallest act of kindness can carry us through the darker turns of life. So perhaps tonight, let this story remind you to notice the quiet gifts of care around you, and if it stirred your heart, consider passing that warmth along to someone who may be waiting for it still.